Hi, Diane.
Hi. Oh my goodness. We had a whole discussion from Temple Emmanuel. The Lunch and Learn was all about, he read some of the things that the Reform rabbis have written, just concern. And, he talks politics all the time. Dana Magat, his name is. He used to be in LA, he said, or maybe San Diego, I'm not sure. But he's been up here 20 years. Are you frozen? Oh no, I'm not the host.
Hi, Joyce.
I was talking. Hello. I was talking to the rabbi, and all of a sudden he froze, and I became the host. So,
hi. Hi.
Okay, you gotta do the class now, Diane.
Exactly.
No, I don't think so. But maybe I
has the text.
What? I didn't.
Just how is everybody?
We're good.
Good. Good.
We're good.
I'm good.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
Welcome back, Rabbi.
I missed you for a minute.
I'm
everybody in, Rabbi.
I'm restarting my computer. Yeah. But yeah, I gotta let the rest of the people in. Yeah, that's never happened at the beginning of the meeting. But
we decided that Diana was going to lead the class tonight.
I have no issue with that. I have a feeling Diane's going to get a little political if we do that. But
no,
but she didn't have the text. I'm sorry.
No, she has it
all in her head.
She could. Oh no, we were just talking about what other synagogues and rabbis and stuff are talking about, and I guarantee you we're going to be a lot less political today than what a lot of synagogues will be doing, because
did you go to that webinar then this afternoon?
No, I actually had the business of unfortunately burying people again. So
God.
A 92-year-old gentleman who was served our military in World War II. So it's always an honor for me to honor and remember people who served. And so this is Jim Schaefer's father, Bud Schaefer, who passed away. And so no, this funeral was supposed to be last week and then got moved because his widow was exposed to COVID. Didn't have it, or at least doesn't have it yet, but was exposed to it. So we had to move it from last week. And then, yeah, as folks know, we have some very sad, situation. And again, with Harvey on the line, we're remembering his mother-in-law and his sister-in-law who passed away, unfortunately, 3 days of each other. And and this is again for Sharon to lose her mother and her sister within just literally days. Well, I don't know if Sharon's in the background there, but we're going to remember his mother-in-law, or Sharon's mother, was 103 years old and was actually in many ways doing really well. And unfortunately she did contract COVID, and Yeah, it's a,
Oh,
Rabbi,
So-
let me correct you. She had COVID, but she recovered. But with the medical illnesses that she had, she just transitioned out. She said enough.
Right.
But
Yeah.
her mind was sharp.
I
She was
understand.
sharp to the very end.
No, yeah, I don't mean to say she, and that, but to me, that's actually, again, a greater indication that she would not necessarily have gone if it wasn't for COVID, if she hadn't gotten that disease. So again, I'm not saying that that was the only cause of illness, but she might not have passed if it hadn't been for COVID.
it might have reduced her immune system's ability to fight anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right
But
on that.
103 is almost like a biblical life.
Yes, it really is.
Yeah.
Rabbi, today
Yeah.
is my sister's 91st birthday.
Oh, wow. She's
You
a-
met her. She
wonderful-
came up, she
Yeah,
came up to you.
lady. Yeah, she's a wonderful lady.
Yeah.
She lives in
Palos Verdes. She's
oh,
in.
whoa, sorry. I'm back on camera. Sorry. Got rid of that. So I'm back off the phone now. Sorry about that.
Welcome again.
Sorry about that bad connection. And again, this is the life we have. I did something sad today, which had nothing to do with funerals. It just had to do with something that I really didn't like doing today. We have had discussions. I think I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it. No, I didn't mention it because we had a board meeting last night, and Harvey was on the board meeting, but Lori shared something that the Reformed congregations were talking about, which were that the Reformed congregation was on a group chat of group discussion, Zoom discussion with synagogues from across the country. Some were from California, but some were out of state, or all across the country. And the synagogues there were talking about what they're doing, and none of the synagogues there have any plans to go back into synagogue anytime during 2021. And this was not just in California, across the country. So I found that to be kind of disheartening.
Yes.
I really didn't want to think about, so anyways, that gets to what I did today that not too long ago that was kind of also sad. I had put in on Zoom, when I set up this Zoom for Tuesday morning classes and Wednesday classes, I put in to the end of February that we would be doing it on Zoom. And and so today I had to extend it. I had to extend when we're going to do it to, and I just for the sake of not wanting to have to think about it again, I did it till the end of 2021. But and I don't know that that's the case. I don't know that we won't have classes in person. In addition, we're definitely going to maintain the Zoom classes so that we can have the Schulmans and Diane and everybody who's out of state or out of the area, out of the region, to be able to be connected to us. But there was something kind of disheartening, because when I set this up back in March, I kind of in my mind said, this time next year or whatever, 10, 11 months from now, I'm sure we'll be back in live room with everybody. And so today was kind of an admission, a recognition, if you will, that this is going to go on longer than till February. So that was
Been a very effective bioweapon, keeping us all enclosed and frightened, and I don't like it.
Yeah. I don't think anybody does. Nobody does. That's one thing we can all agree on. So the nice thing today was that my wife got vaccinated, and so I was proud to have to know that at least she's when she's at the Jewish home, she was up at the Jewish home of San Francisco today, that she's walking around, and well, I guess she won't be 100% or 95% until she gets the second vaccine, but I'm working on trying to get myself vaccinated so that I can feel more comfortable visiting with people and seeing people. So obviously,
Rabbi, you know that Ralph's is having, doing it up by you?
yeah, we tried to get a couple places, because some of the work I do is hospice related, so they definitely want me to be done, but then there's a question of who can do it through. So we tried to do it. I have an appointment on Friday in San Fernando, and I have, believe it or not, later on that day, if I have some problem there, I can be at Dodger Stadium at 3:20 for a vaccination. So
I think you should just go to the Dodger Stadium. It would mean more to you.
I know I would love to. I would love to be at Dodgers, but hopefully hopefully sometime on Friday I'll do it. We
Good.
almost had a booking at Henry Mayo, but it fell through. But again, I hope everybody, like I've told people before, I haven't turned anything down. I've agreed to go to every funeral, and every time anybody's asked me to come by, I've done it. I'll do it. But I feel much more comfortable if I'm vaccinated, and I'm not worried about spreading anything to anybody else. So
I can't wait to see you. I'm looking forward to it when you can.
I'm definitely, because I think it's very close. I think in the next 2 days, I'm hoping, and then like I said, then I'll feel really comfortable seeing people. And again, it's not just age, related issues. It's other people who have health things. And I told people yesterday, I had this. I mean, it's like constantly getting. Almost every time I pick up the phone, I'm afraid to see the phone ring. Honestly, I've gotten to be where I'm afraid to see the phone ring. I got a call during Midrash class yesterday, Tuesday morning, and I was notified that somebody, it's not a member of the temple, somebody who lives in Santa Clarita, and the kids used to be members. They've since moved out of state. I think they've actually, they've been out for about 4 or 5 years. But I didn't even know he passed away. And the cemetery called me and said, "Are you, the funeral is this week?" And I said, I didn't even know he was sick. So it is, I can only tell you that we've never seen anything like this, with people dying and they're so overloaded, they don't even know who's coming or going. So hopefully this will be done soon. And I don't know. I don't know how much I can't imagine. I hope it doesn't get worse, because I can't fathom it. So I'm hoping that we're going to see an end to this soon. Again, I hope everybody stays healthy and safe and secure and not afraid. That being said, we're going to start the Torah portion today. And again, I hope that I don't have any more technical glitches. I know out there's going to be a lot of people that tie this Torah portion to our current political situation. I'm going to try not to have this seep over into politics, but one can make the argument that whatever side you're on right now, one of the things that we've seen, especially in the last few weeks, is people clamping down and being more intractable in their positions. Ironically, maybe less so the politicians. We've seen some politicians actually change directions or have changes of heart. But what I've noticed amongst people is very little change of heart. And of course, not every politician has changed heart. I'll make that obviously clear. But there have been some politicians who have said things that we didn't expect them to say on both sides of the aisle. But I do think that for the most part, actually, what we've seen is a lot of people just kind of become more set in their ways. And the reason that I'm saying this, of course, is that this week is the portion that we see Pharaoh. We have the famous lines of repeatedly of God saying, "I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart." And this really gets to the issue that every year we talk about, every time everyone almost talks about this portion. is a discussion about free will, and why does it seem like, at least in some cases, God doesn't allow for free will, in the sense that Pharaoh doesn't really have an option here to do anything other than continue on the course that he's on, which is his destruction and the destruction of the people in Egypt. So you combine that portion, this portion, with our current political environment, it makes for a whole lot of divrei Torah that are about political leaders and about hardening the heart. I encourage people, if they would like, to apply this Torah portion as we read it and as you become familiar with it to what you're feeling politically. Would love to see people write it. I'd rather not engage in the discussion today, only because, again, we don't have that much time, and we actually do have, it's nowhere near as long and complex as last week's portion, but we're basically reading about the plagues today. We actually go all the way through the first 7 plagues. And so that is the majority of the portion, but there are some other things in here which we're going to see before we get into that. So last week we read a lot. We read about the Israelites becoming slaves. We read about Moses's life, limited amount that we get. We read about the burning bush, and we read about Moses first appearing to Pharaoh. So it's a lot. It goes till the very end of chapter 5, and interestingly, the way the Torah portion begins with the very first verse of chapter 6, verse 1. I also mentioned yesterday, and I mentioned last week, and I'll mention it again right now. We're actually at a very strange point of convergence, a nexus, if you will. We're actually reading the part of the Torah that we're studying on Tuesday mornings. So as we're reading the Midrash, we're reading this text and going back and forth. So I didn't see anybody else join us from Tuesdays that are normally there for Tuesdays. Diane and Mike and Gordon and Elise are there. They're all there normally on Tuesday mornings too, but we don't. I encouraged. Oh, and there's Sandy Keaton. And speaking of those who join us on Tuesdays, she's joining us now too. What's nice about this is we don't oftentimes get to read the whole Torah portion that the Midrash is based on, but now we are. We're essentially in that groove right now of the Torah and the Midrash lining up, and that'll never happen. Like, it'll never happen again. So this is one of those strange convergences, like Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, and everything else aligning up so we can do this. But it really does. It's great for me because over the last few weeks, we're close, but we're not there. And so sometimes I forget what we're doing, and I forget whether we said that in Tuesday or whether we said that on Wednesday, because they are close. But now this is it. And so they're lining up. Next week, we're going to move into the last few plagues on Wednesday nights. And on Tuesdays, we're going to move out of the plagues into the first Passover, which is actually in next week's portion too, the very first Passover, which was the night before, the night as the 10th plague is obviously happening, the night before we leave. But then we're going to move into, in the Midrash class, we're going to move into, we'll start moving into the Sea of Reeds. But by the time we're done with the Sea of Reeds the week after, then we're going to be accelerated on Wednesday, and we'll be far, far past it. So let me do something now, which I forgot to do already, which is to share this up on Facebook, because we are going to, we do have people that are trying to join us on Facebook, and I didn't do it because of my technical glitch at the beginning. I just want to get this up there for everybody. So this will be up there for everybody to see. And then we'll go back to the Torah. Okay. One more key. Here we are. All right. So interestingly, the Torah does something strange here, which is, or not, I shouldn't say the Torah does something strange. The Christian scholars who put in the chapters and verses did something that we could make an argument, where you can make an argument, makes sense or doesn't make sense, which is our Torah portion begins with the first line of our, again, the second, we start the second line of chapter 6. We felt that the last verse of the Torah portion should actually be the first line of the chapter of what is the chapter 6. So the way the chapter ended, it said, "Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with this people, and you have not delivered your people," which, as we know, is kind of a negative way to end the portion. So when we decided, which was earlier, when we decided where we're going to end the idea, we thought, let's end on a happier note. Because again, we try to end a portion, not a chapter, but a portion on a happier note. And so our portion ends with the words, "Then the Lord said to Moses, you shall soon see what I do to Pharaoh. He shall let them go because of a greater might. Indeed, because of a greater might, he shall drive them from the land." And so that is the word vayad chazakah, with a strong arm, which they translated as a great might. But yad chazakah means a strong hand or a strong arm. That's the way we end our portion, which ends on a happier note, which is God telling them it's all going to be okay. So the first verse of the portion then goes, "God spoke to Moses and said, I am the Lord," which you can understand why the Christians began it with this line, because it seems like there's like a break in the action there, which is, oh, so like if we were going to commercial, it's a perfect time to break for a commercial, which is Moses saying to God, the people's lives keep getting worse because of what you're doing, and it's not working. Well, not so with the way, again, we didn't want to end on that sad note, so we had the good note, but it does make sense to some extent to begin with the words, "God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord," because here this idea continues kind of with this one, the line that came before. Anyways, this is the way we have it. God spoke to Moses and said, "I am the Lord." And then for the first word of that verse, that second verse of the portion, or the third verse in the chapter, Vayera el Avraham, I appeared, which is the name of this
I don't see
portion.
what you're saying, Rabbi.
What?
I don't see what you're reading on the screen.
It's not showing up?
No, I don't think so.
Does anybody else have it?
No.
Not what you're talking about. We're just listening.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to share it again, which means I'm having a technical glitch. So this is what I was worried about. All right, so I will put back up the portion. I'm going to try it one more time. So this will not be good if I don't have it. So, up there now?
No, it's dark.
It says I'm screen sharing. Okay, let me try one other thing here. Let me try something through my, I'm going to try to, yeah, this is not,
There we are.
is it up?
Yes.
Okay, well, hopefully it'll hold up. So here we have the first word of the second verse of the portion, or the third verse of the chapter, Vayera el Avraham, that God says to Moses, "I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by the name." And here they don't even write it out in English, of course. They write the letters Yud He Vav He, the 4-letter name of God. Tetragrammaton, Hashem, the name, the Lord, which we just had just above us.
Yes.
So God says to Moses, "I didn't tell the patriarchs my name. I gave you information that they didn't have." And what we had interestingly read in the Midrash yesterday was that as God is saying this, he's kind of fed up with Moses, because Moses doesn't seem to get, he's not with the program yet. And how do we know that? Because Moses just said to God, why did you bring harm on this people? Why did you send me? Now remember, Moses never wanted to go in the first place. God had to talk him into it.
Mhm.
And so he's still saying to God, why did you send me? But now he has an added challenge to God. Why did you send me? Because it's worse for the people. Ever since I've come, now the work for them is harder. And so you could look at it one of two ways. One is that he really still doesn't want to do this, and so he's finding a pretext to challenge God again, which is just leave me out of this. Or he indeed feels inadequate because he's not getting the job done. And so it's not really coming up with an excuse for getting out of it. He's just stating the fact that I'm not good at this. And so you could look at it either way. Either again, he really didn't want to do it in the first place, so he's just looking for excuses. He's just trying to, weasel out of this, or he really does feel bad that it's not working. So the Midrash points out that God here at this point is saying to Moses, look, I let you in on a secret that I didn't even tell Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They didn't get this secret. You did. And yet you're still doubting yourself. You're still doubting me. I've told you things that already that I haven't even told them, including my name. I've made myself known to you in a way that they didn't get. And by the way, the Midrash also pointed out that God said, and I want to share it because it was a wonderful Midrash. God says to Moses, as much as you feel I'm letting you down, me, God, letting you down, the other people that I just mentioned, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they also had reason to feel like I'm letting them down, and they never said it. Why? For those who were with us yesterday, you may remember, right? God said to Moses, you remember this guy, Abraham, I told him I'm leaving him, I'm giving him this entire land, yet he had to buy a place of burial for his wife in a land that I promised him, and he never complained about it. He never said to me, God, why do I have to pay for my own land? He never said that. You are complaining. These guys didn't complain. And so God is frustrated with Moses, to put it mildly.
Rabbi Mark, is this
Yeah.
where we all start questioning everything? They say that Jews question everything, that we are not just followers that
Well,
in that respect. So is this where this all started? And
so I don't know if you were there yesterday when I offered this possibility. Look, when the rabbis, we have the Torah as it is, which is Moses, at the very least, not having confidence in himself for whatever reason. Again, whether he's looking for excuses to get out of it, which is a real possibility, or he really is genuinely frustrated and upset and disappointed. That is there. But there is also this possibility that I suggested yesterday, which when the rabbis really turn on Moses here, which they do, they really turn on him. I mentioned it's to some extent because they want to explain why Moses wasn't able to go into the promised land. Because we know it's because he strikes the rock. The Torah says that, but they never feel comfortable that that's a good enough reason. They say the same thing that we do when we read this, that part later on, which is really after everything Moses did, you cut him off. You wouldn't let him do the one thing that he really wanted to do, which is to take the people into the land. So what the rabbis do is find a very good reason here, even though it doesn't say it in the Torah, a very good reason here for why Moses didn't live up to and disappointed God. That God had a reason at this point right here to not let him into the land. And again, you could say, well, that doesn't say it, but there is stuff here, which is the next line, I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. So the Midrash says that God says to Moses, I'm going to let you see what I do to Pharaoh. You'll see that power, but you're not going to see the power that I bring on when I bring the people into the land. Joshua will see that. He'll work those miracles when we defeat the kings of the Canaanite kings, the 31 kings of Canaan, as it says in the Midrash. You won't be there for that. Joshua will, because of what you did just now, because of your challenge and because of that. So that's one possibility, is the rabbis just want to explain why Moses gets punished so bad. The other possibility that I said is, which I think is also a possibility, is that the rabbis are doing something here with an intent of, to some extent, they kind of show us their mentality, which is that it's not so much just that they challenge God or doubting God or questioning God, but that what really happens here is that the rabbis do something which maybe I'm projecting, but I think is a possibility. Moses is called Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, Moses the rabbi. He's the ultimate rabbi. And what he does here is he shows his inadequacy and his own feelings of failure here. And isn't it possible that the rabbis are actually saying what every rabbi feels at a certain point, which is, I have failed. I have not lived up to my possibilities. I have not done what I should have done. I could have done better. And what is really happening here is every Jewish leader who's had that ability and who's had that responsibility to say, I can't do this. I'm inadequate. I'm not up to this task. And isn't it possible that the rabbis actually are projecting their own feelings, not of Moses, but their own personal feelings of, I can't do this. And I could be giving a modern interpretation, but it is very possible that that's why the Midrash exists. And that's what we can mine out of this too, which is, and watch what Moses does here 2 times in chapter 6. Okay. So God continues, I've now heard the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the Israelite people, I am the Lord. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements. And I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession, I, the Lord. So God tells the people, I'm going to redeem you and I'm going to bring you into the land. It's a two-part promise. I'll get you out of slavery and I'm going to bring you to the promised land, the land I promised to your ancestors. But it says when Moses told this to the Israelites, they would not listen to Moses, their spirits crushed by cruel bondage. So they didn't just not believe him because he's just some guy. Even, if they saw some miracles he could do those things that, like turning the rod into a snake and turning his arm into leprosy and then not leprosy, and then that he can turn the Nile water into blood, all those great things he can show them. Doesn't matter, because it says their spirits were crushed by cruel bondage. It was too much. The experiences that they had didn't allow them to listen to him or to believe this. And then it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites depart from his land. Now he's already done that once. He got thrown out. Heard that last week. But Moses appealed to the Lord saying, the Israelites would not listen to me. How then should Pharaoh heed me? And then he says, a man of impeded speech. Not Pharaoh, but him. Why will they listen to me? That's the word. It's clear that he is the subject of the sentence. I have a speech impediment, and that's the literal translation, or I have I have some type of thing on my lips. And again, it is difficult to know exactly what the Torah is saying, but speech impediment's a pretty good translation. I don't speak well. So he says, why will Pharaoh listen to me when my own people didn't listen to me? It's a fair question. And so what does God say? The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in regard to the Israelites, and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, instructing them to deliver the Israelites from the land of Egypt. So the takeaway from this is that we get back to Aaron, that Aaron is going to also be part of the message. Okay. So Aaron gets brought back into the story. We're reminded that Aaron is part of this. Now the Torah is going to change directions or do something a little strange. Let's take a look, because we suddenly have a genealogy. And it's fair to say, why? So here's what it says. The following are the heads of the respective clans. The sons of Reuben, Israel's firstborn, Enoch and Palul, Hezron and Carmi. Those are the families of Reuben. The sons of Shimon, Yemuel, Yamin, Ohad, Yachin, Zohar, and Shaul. The son of a Canaanite woman. Those are the families of Shimon. By the way, this is the same Shimon who killed his brother-in-law, Shechem, for sleeping or raping his sister Dinah. So he had at least one son with a Canaanite woman. These are the names of Levi's son by lineage: Gershon, Kohat, and Merari. The span of Levi's life was 137 years. The sons of Gershon were Libni and Shimei by their families. Shimei. The sons of Kohat, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, Uzziel, and the span of Kohat's life was 133 years. The sons of Merari, Machli and Mushi. These are the families of the Levites by their lineage. Amram took to wife his father's sister, Yocheved, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. The span of Amram's life was 137 years. That is Moses's father and Aaron's father, Amram. And here it says flat out that it was his, not from the tribe of Levi, but it was Levi's, it was his aunt. That's what it says right there. So she was of the older generation. She might have been close to his age. He could have been older, whatever. I mean, you could have an aunt that's roughly the same age as you, or uncle, whatever, you could have that. But especially if they had different wives or whatever. I mean, it's possible, right? So here it says flat out how old they are. But here's the weird thing, folks. So we're in chapter 6, verse 20. Verse 20. This is the first time that we've actually read about Moses' parents' names. Chapter 2 just said a certain woman of Levi married a man of Levi, and that's it. Here, 5 chapters later, or 4 chapters later, we get their names. So it's strange. It's not what you'd expect. Let's put it mildly. It's not the normal way you tell a story, which is you introduce the people and then 4 chapters later give them their names. Doesn't also here mention Miriam, but it's not the end of the world that it doesn't. And just so you know, it's not because it doesn't list any women. You're about to see that. The sons of Izhar, Korach, who we're going to read later on, right? This is the guy who rebels against Moses. This is Moses and Aaron's cousin. Nepheg and Zichri. The sons of Uziel, Mishael, Elzaphan, and Sithri. Aaron took to wife Elisheva. So here it mentions a woman's name. It mentions Aaron's wife. Doesn't mention Zipporah, by the way, which is also interesting. Doesn't mention Zipporah, and doesn't mention Moses' kids here. Daughter of Aminadav, the sister of Nachshon. And she bore him Nadav and Avihu, Eleazar, and Eleazar, and Itamar. Those are the 4 sons of Aaron. Nadav and Avihu, we read about, will end up being killed as they're offering the bad alien sacrifice in Leviticus. The sons of Korach, Asir, Elkanah, Abiasaph, those are the families of the Korachites. And again, even though Korach is a bad guy, we have a tradition that his kids were not rebellious. They were actually good kids. And Aaron's son, Eleazar, took to wife one of Putiel's daughters, and she bore him Pinchas. Those are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites by their families. So we read about Pinchas, Eleazar's son, who ends up also having a Torah portion named after him back in later on in Numbers. And he becomes one of the great leaders of the people. And so he gets singled out as Aaron's grandson. And so we have a little genealogy. But here's the weird thing that you could ask, which is a fair question to ask. Oh, I just want to point out that the next line says, it is the same Aaron and Moses to whom God said, bring forth the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop. That seems to be a weird thing to say, which is, oh, and by the way, it's the same Aaron and Moses that we've been talking about up until now. But okay, it's another way of describing them. But notice here, it was they who spoke to the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to free the Israelites from the Egyptians. They are the same Moses and Aaron. For when Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, and the Lord said to Moses, I am the Lord, speak to Pharaoh, king of Israel, and I will tell you, etc. And they, well, actually, let me read the last line. Moses appealed to the Lord, saying, see, I've impeded speech. How then should Pharaoh heed me? So we get a repetition of what we heard in the very portion. And by the way, oh yeah, let's go back to where we left off before we went into this mini genealogy. So this weird mini genealogy in chapter 6 is unique for a few reasons. And again, it's kind of, as I said, it's boundaried by the two I'm of impeded speech. And again, okay, back to the story. But the genealogy is a weird one because first of all, it's not an entire genealogy. It's only a genealogy of Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. So it's the first three tribes. So I just showed you the next son would be Judah, and then we go through the rest of the sons, right? You get to the 12 sons. It's over. Like this is it. There's three tribes mentioned here. The first three, but only three. So it's weird. Why do we have this mini genealogy? I mean, what do you think? I mean, you just saw it. There's three tribes mentioned and only three tribes: Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. Why? Why do you think? Why are there three tribes? And by the way, I'm not asking you because I know the answer. I've heard answers before. I don't know that any of them are going to leave you feeling satisfied. But does anybody want to guess why, or throw out there, why do we have a mini genealogy of three tribes of the 12? This is Torah, folks. This is chapter 6.
They're Leahs. They're all Leahs.
Yeah, but the weird thing is we only get three. We only get three tribes. So, look, it's possible that the whole purpose was to get to the tribe of Levi. Like the author had more stuff and just cut it off, or the editor, or whatever, however you want to say it, just that's it. We don't need it. We don't need anything else. we don't need Judah and Issachar and Zebulun. We don't, not relevant, not important. We're only trying to establish who Moses and Aaron are and who their families are. Korach and Pinchas and some of the people that you're going to hear later on about, right? That's who you get. That's it. But that still begs the question of like, why don't you just give us Levi? Why did you have to give us Reuben and Shimon? Why did you have to give us those tribes? Why not just give us the Levites? If all you really care about is the Levites, if you're only really trying to explain who Moses and Aaron and his family are, why do you give us the other ones? Why give us Reuben and Shimon? So you can understand why they ended it at 3. Done, got to the 3rd, and that's all we need to know. But still, it begs the question, why do you have the other 2? So there's not great answers on this. I will tell you that the traditional answers that are given are that the reason that we have these lineages, these genealogies recited for us for Reuben and Shimon, are because what we learned about Reuben and Shimon in Genesis, what we just read a couple weeks ago when Jacob gives blessings to his sons, Reuben and Shimon and Levi are not given very good blessings. We have to get all the way to Judah before we get a good blessing. The fourth son, Judah, Jacob says to him, you're going to be king over all your brothers, right? And of course he is, because King David comes from the tribe of Judah. The Judahites end up being the tribe of the kings, Judah. But the first 3, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi, all get bad news, if you will. Jacob reminds Shimon and Levi of how they went into Shechem and killed everybody. And Reuben, we learn again about how he slept with one of his father's concubines, and he's not very good either. Unstable as water is what the Torah actually says in Genesis. And so the rabbis wanted to, they point out that because Reuben, Shimon, and Levi had such bad information given about them by Jacob, that God wanted them not to be too sad. Now we know the Levites are going to be okay because that's Moses and Aaron. But maybe with Reuben and Shimon getting an extra mention here, they are indeed leaders. Reuben and Shimon, they get to be leaders and they get counted. And that even though they didn't live up to the levels of Judah, they are still good people, that they weren't all bad. And that by mentioning them in chapter 6,
It's like an Aliyah.
Yeah, very good. It's like an Aliyah. They get called up. Absolutely right. And so Levi gets the Levi Aliyah. They get called up as Levi, but Reuben and Shimon do get counted. And so it's a nice thing to think about, that maybe possibly, and again, what the rabbis taught is that we shouldn't think that Reuben and Shimon are such schnooks. You know, they're okay, and their descendants turned out to be okay too. So it is a weird little genealogy that we have in chapter 6. It really is kind of, again, breaks up the story. It breaks up the narrative. And so we jump back in to the narrative, which again is Moses saying, God, why me? I can't speak good. I don't speak well. I don't speak good. So God says to Moses, look, I would say, look, re'eh, see, look, I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron is the prophet. Let him speak. So this line really does go with the previous line. Again, the chapter and verse here, the break is not great, because that really does break up the middle of that idea. You shall repeat all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the Israelites depart from his land. So I'll tell you what to do, and you tell Aaron, and then he'll tell Pharaoh. So there's a communication chain that again, you don't want to speak to Pharaoh. Okay, fine. You'll tell Aaron, and then Aaron will tell him. But it doesn't even matter. Whatever you say, whatever Aaron says, Whatever I say, most importantly, I'm God, doesn't matter. I will harden Pharaoh's heart that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. So God says flat out, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to let him. And the words here are akshe et lev. I will harden his heart, which again, we have a couple of different phrases here for the hardening of his heart. But this one does say flat out, not that Pharaoh's heart will be hardened, not that he'll not want to do it, but that I'll make him not want to do it. I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And so God takes responsibility for what happens. God is saying, and again, people like to point out, as we said, doesn't it seem like his free will gets taken away? Doesn't seem fair. Doesn't seem like Pharaoh's given an opportunity to back out. And the Torah basically says, God set Pharaoh up so that God's greatness could be magnified there. Now, it is fair to say, as the rabbis definitely do, because we looked at it yesterday, and we'll look at it again a little bit next week too, which is Pharaoh and the Egyptians' death warrant, if you will, was already signed.
Mhm.
There's nothing that they can do to change that. They're not given a chance to ask for forgiveness because they've already passed the point of being able to be forgiven, or at least one could say let off the hook without punishment. There's nothing that they can do at this stage to get themselves out of the punishment. And so to some extent, the rabbis look at this, and that's why when we read it yesterday, that the title on the page for the plagues was Measure for Measure, which is that the Egyptians had already brought on themselves divine punishment by their actions. And so, yes, it appears that the manifestation of these things is punishment, but it's not punishment for Pharaoh simply like saying, oh, I changed my mind. It is really a foregone conclusion from the beginning that this is going to happen. Which again, it kind of begs the question, so why doesn't God just let it happen? Why does Pharaoh have to go, why do I have to go through this song and dance of Pharaoh going, yeah, I'll let you go. Oh, I changed my mind. Why do we have to have that? So again, there is this dance that goes on in this Torah portion between God, Moses, and Pharaoh, or God, Moses, and Aaron and Pharaoh, and they're doing this play, or this dance is being enacted and then reenacted in front of the whole country of Egypt and in front of all of the Israelites. And so there's an understanding here that to some extent, this is theater, that this is the greatest example, if you will, one of the earliest examples of political theater, which is again, highly relevant and actually almost to the point of you can't make this stuff up. This is the people on the stage who are doing this are really representing constituencies and are representing ideologies and are representing things bigger than themselves, values and operational systems that are not one person or even 100 people. They're thousands or millions of people, and they're ideologies that transcend generations. And so
lessons are taught with stories, and the stories have to have interest, and the series of things that happen create the interest, so the stories are remembered.
Absolutely. And I will tell you that the reality is that when it's acted through people and through, and I would argue it's one of the reasons why, I don't know about you, but I react differently to things that I see on stage differently than when I see it on television or in a movie. I very rarely have been moved to tears by a movie. I would say never, but very rarely. I can think of a few times when I saw stage productions and I wept like a baby, like I needed to be somewhere else. And I've told people this before. When I saw Fiddler on the Roof performed in Yiddish on the theater, on the stage down at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, which, by the way, I'm hoping that I just had some news that I hope we're able to do. We may be able to be broadcasting this on JLTV, which I have mixed feelings about this because I'd really like people to see it on stage because it'll be a whole lot more powerful. But I do want people to see it. And if, God forbid, people never get a chance to see it on stage, they should see it on stage, because you will, I don't know that you'll cry like a baby like I did, but I think you'll be moved to see Fiddler on the Roof being performed in Yiddish. Remember, the musical was written in English. The stories of Tevye and his daughters were written in Yiddish by Shalom Aleichem. And so it's literally like putting the stories back into the original language. It's very powerful and very powerful. And so I wept during that and didn't cry a little bit. I mean, I literally had to put something over my face so that people wouldn't see me. So I actually felt that way too, watching the end of Hamilton on stage. There was parts of that, especially the part where Hamilton's son dies, that I just, for anyone who's ever lost a child, it's way too powerful I mean, just thinking about it brings me to tears. So there are a couple scenes, that scene in particular, and scenes, theater and scenes. My point is only that theater has that power, because somehow, even though we know that people are acting, and even though we know they do this every night, that when we see people in front of us acting out and actually demonstrating emotion, and even if it's fake and even if it's scripted, there's something very powerful about that. And I don't know that it can be conveyed, in two dimensions on a screen or on a through a projector. I can't explain it other than if you know what I'm talking about and have been to the theater and seen something that was that moving, either funny or dramatic, emotional, you know what I'm talking about. And political theater, to some extent, is a version of that, because again, when we see people reenacting or enacting principles and values, not, again, as Joy said, not as a reading an article, but actually saying the words and speaking from the heart, or even if they don't really feel it, as they tell the story and as they recount. And when we see history unfolding in front of us, there's something that we recognize it changes us. We fundamentally change. And so I was communicating with Philip over the last few days, and he's been studying Greco-Roman poetry and some of the classics. The Greeks were really good at this. They had a great ability to, and I'm telling you, thousands of years later on, the productions of Sophocles, or something from Sophocles, or some of Euripides, some of these playwrights. I mean, it's amazing to sit back and think that these are 2,500 years old, because they are so powerful still. And so they were really good at creating drama and creating powerful literary devices. We were too. And
God was too.
We were really good at it. And yes, and God set it up so that we'd have some drama here, which becomes timeless, which is that when we see what Pharaoh does here, we recognize in ourselves and in people that we see in our world, we see these things happening, and we are always amazed by it. We always say that really didn't just happen. I mean, when it happens in front of us, we still don't believe it, and that's that kind of that disjunction, that point where did that really just happen, is exactly what this is about. This scene that we're about to see is all about that. Did that really just happen? Because it couldn't have just happened. Doesn't make sense.
Well, isn't this in Greek mythology, the gods will interfere, and where God says, "But I will harden Pharaoh's heart." You see incidents, situations like this happen a lot in the Iliad, in Virgil's Aeneid, and the question is, you know, do human beings have agency, or is it fate or God or multiple gods interfering?
Yeah, and this is where, and this to some extent, it's not the only place, but it's one of the places where we see this playing out in the Torah. And again, there are a lot of ways to read this. There are people who are just frustrated with it and say this really bothers them, because I remember I used to get in discussions with my mother that said, she would say, this doesn't seem Jewish. This doesn't seem like the free will that God gives us. Why is Pharaoh not have that? And, it's something that's always stayed with me. My answer at the beginning, what I gave you, which is that this is political theater, and that this was already a foregone conclusion, what had to happen. And so what we really have is, okay, but when this has to happen, what are people's reactions? And there are different ways that I've read this over the years. I definitely was thinking about it in the last few days, when I wonder whether people, at a certain point, the comeuppance just has to happen, and so there is a sense of doom that is inevitable, and so what do you want to call that? You want to call that God? You want to call that fate? And you want to call that justice, karma? I don't know what you want to call it, but there seems to be sometimes when it's inescapable, and I guess it kind of begs the question. And again, this isn't the only question, and maybe again, it may not be where anyone wants to go, but I will offer it as a thought experiment. What if the story was that Pharaoh had a chance to do something to get out of the punishment? What if Pharaoh could have changed direction and asked for forgiveness, like the people do in Nineveh? We just read it, the story of Yom Kippur, the story of Jonah at Yom Kippur. We just read that seems like it was a week ago. It was a few months ago. But if we could read a story about people asking for forgiveness and changing direction, would number one, that feel fair? And to some extent, would that go against the sense of justice that we also have as Jews? We want to see justice. Look, kind of, again, it's hard not to read this without thinking about the German experience over the last, several generations now. We're going back to the 1940s, but are Germans still paying the price for what the Nazis did? You can't argue that they're paying a price. They are. The Germans are still very much, number one, not trusted by, I'm not talking about Americans. Americans are actually pretty lenient on Germans. But if you go to Poland, if you go to Russia, if you go to France, if you go to Holland, if you go to anywhere within firing range of Germany, you'll still hear a lot of resentment about the Germans. And I don't mean because of the Nazis. I have people in Poland, and some of you went with me on our trip to Poland and Czech Republic. Those people don't like the Germans. They'll tell you today, right now, the Germans are still lording over us and still are our rulers, and they won Europe without ever having firing a shot because of the EU. And so they still don't trust the Germans, and the Germans are still have that stigma of being imperialistic and
Arrogant.
autocratic and arrogant, and it won't go away. It doesn't matter what the Germans do, they are going to have that. And again, as Jews, it's very hard for us to not think about Germans as Nazis. I mean, these are real things that that the Germans have to deal with. Now you could say that's fair, that's not fair, but that's the reality. You can't argue that that's part of what Germany still lives with. And who knows how long they'll live with that. So is that fair? Is it, how do we come to terms with it? I think that's a personal decision that people have to make. But it's a reality. Now you could also argue, well, the average German who paid the price for the Nazis, even if they weren't a Nazi, even if they weren't in the Wehrmacht, but the average German, what they had to pay, the price that they had to pay after the war, and the destruction that was visited on a city like Dresden, you could say, well, that's not really fair. But there's an issue. The Nazis were in power. They needed to be defeated. And so the Allies defeated them in an extraordinary way. Should they have escaped that type of destruction? And you can make the argument that once the Germans were complicit as a nation, and remember, 40% of them voted for Hitler in 1932, once they had made that decision, were they not responsible for what came after? And so, as the rabbis put out, it's measure for measure. So to some extent, God can't let Pharaoh off the hook, because I'm just offering it. I'm not saying it's the reason. I'm only saying it is a possibility that this had to happen. That Pharaoh and the Egyptians had to be punished because of what they had already done. Again, you can agree with it, disagree with it, sit with it, but think about it as a possibility. And so when we talk about Pharaoh's heart being hardened, there really is no way for him to back out, because God can't let the Egyptians off the hook. And maybe God, in God's compassion, would have. Not going to let it happen. So, Pharaoh will not heed you. I will lay my hand on Egypt and deliver my ranks, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with extraordinary chastisements. And that's where we left off. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand over Egypt and bring out the Israelites from their midst. And Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded, so they did. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 when they made their demand on Pharaoh. Which means, folks, so when we talk about how long did the plagues last, it couldn't have lasted much more than a year, because it says that they were 80 when they make the demand. Moses is 120 when he dies after 40 years in the wilderness. So if you do the math, 120 minus 40 is 80. That's what the Torah says. Aaron's 3 years older than him. They're not spring chickens when they start this amazing job, which again, they were definitely, even in those days, even at 130 years or 120 year lifespans, they had also, by this point, folks, had at least reached middle age, which tells us that, again, you're never too old to take on amazing things, amazing challenges. It's nice to know.
You mean like being 78 years old isn't too old? Not according to Torah.
According to Torah, you're not even there yet. Well, it depends on how long you think you're going to last, but you can definitely start a new career. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh speaks to you and says, produce your marvel, you shall say to Aaron, take your rod and cast it before Pharaoh. It shall turn to a serpent. So God told them what to do. Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and did just as the Lord had commanded. Aaron cast down his rod in the presence of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and it turned to a serpent. Then Pharaoh, for his part, summoned the wise men and sorcerers and the Egyptian magicians It's a hard thing to say a bunch of times. Egyptian magicians. And in turn, they did the same with their spells. Each cast down his rod and they turned into serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed their rod. And again, as we read in the Midrash, I like to point out, for those who were not there Tuesday morning, it was last week, that it wasn't just his magicians that turned their staves into serpents. According to the Midrash, folks, anybody remember? His wife did it too. Pharaoh's wife could do the same trick. So it's not a great trick because his wife could do it. Anybody could do it. The kids could do it. It's what the Midrash says. But of course, there's a little trick to this one, which is that Aaron's rod swallowed their rod. And again, according to this, what the Midrash pointed out was, it says that it swallowed the rods. Now, again, you could say that they're just using the word for the serpents, but it says the rod swallowed the rod. So the Midrash points out that's why the miracle was so crazy, because they weren't serpents anymore. They were back. It was back to being a rod, and then that rod swallowed the rod. It wasn't a serpent as a rod that did it. It was the rod that did it. Okay, well, it doesn't matter because Pharaoh's heart stiffened and he did not heed them, as the Lord had said. God said. So here we have the word chazek lev. It's the stiffening of the heart rather than the hardening of the heart. But again, we have a couple different phrases used: hardening of the heart and then stiffening of the heart. Which you could say maybe he's just making the hardened heart even harder or stiffening. And the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh as he is coming out of the water and station yourself before him at the edge of the Nile, taking with you the rod that turned into a snake. And let me just give you a commentary, by the way, on this scene, because we get this scene a couple times, and the not in the Midrash, but later on, rabbis like Rashi and others point out something interesting here. Why does Pharaoh get confronted by Moses in the morning as he's coming out of the water? Seems like a weird place to confront the Pharaoh. So again, it says it's in the morning, he's coming out of the water, and you go where he goes into the water, which again, the fact that Moses even knows where that is, and the fact that Moses confronts him there is kind of wild, because assumedly it's not like in front of everybody. This is like a mano. This is not in front of a lot of people. So Rashi says something interesting. I think it's Rashi or Ibn Ezra, one of the medieval commentaries, says something interesting here, which is why does Moses do this? Or why does God tell him to do this? Does anyone want to guess what Pharaoh's doing in the water? Anybody? Anybody want to guess what Pharaoh is doing in the water?
I'm thinking that he's going to the
Bathing?
Bathing was one answer, but no, I think Diane, you said it.
Yeah, going to the bathroom.
How'd you know that?
I just guessed it. I've seen it done.
Diane, nobody stand next to Diane in the pool.
I've seen it done.
I haven't done it. I've seen people do it. No, yes, Diane is 100% right. This is what Rashi said. Rashi said Pharaoh did. Does anyone want to guess why Pharaoh's going to the bathroom in the water, though?
Well,
I love what Rashi says. Does anybody want to guess?
no, but I mean, when you say going to the bathroom, can we be more definitive? I mean, is this like Caddyshack or what?
Well, no,
what's going on
no,
here?
but the rabbis point out something really interesting here, which I think is really quite remarkable. Because it's not just that Pharaoh goes to the bathroom in the Nile, which, by the way, that's even more embarrassing that Moses is catching him as he's doing this. But they have a great reason for it. I love this reason. Pharaoh, what? Someone want to say?
I think he's trying to be godlike, and
That's it. Diane got it. Diane, 2 for 2. Yeah, that's exactly right. He's telling all his people he's a god, right? So he doesn't want his people thinking he's going to the bathroom. So his trick is that he goes in the Nile. So he never goes to the bathroom in front of him. He just goes into the Nile. That's his trick. So he's godlike. He wants to maintain this godlike appearance to them. So he goes into the Nile. So of course, as this is a wonderful commentary of why he's there. Again, regardless, if he's either bathing or going to the bathroom is even better because he's catching him in the act. But either way, Moses is confronting him in a compromised position. Let's put it that way. And so he confronts Pharaoh in a place where Pharaoh maybe didn't assume that anyone was going to catch him. So it's a great scene, and it is worth commenting on, which we haven't before. And so here's what he's supposed to say to him. The Lord, the God of Hebrews, sent me to say, let my people go, that they may worship me in the wilderness. But you have paid no heed until now. So again, still at this time, they're not saying we're going to go forever. We're going to go worship in the wilderness. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. See, I shall strike the water in the Nile with the rod that is in my hand, and it will be turned to blood. And the fish in the Nile will die, and the Nile will stink, so that the Egyptians will find it impossible to drink the water of the Nile, which is their lifeblood. And the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and hold out your arms over the waters, its rivers, its canals, its ponds, all of its bodies of water, that they may turn to blood. There shall be blood throughout the land of Egypt, even in the vessels of wood and stone. So any of the water, not just in the Nile, but any of the waters of Egypt are going to turn to blood. So there seems to be kind of two different versions of this, the way the story kind of goes. And again, in this one, it is Moses. In the first one, it's Moses, just Moses. And in the second one, it is Aaron too. And here, it seems as though, again, when Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded, he lifted up the rod and struck the water in the Nile in the sight of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and all the water in the Nile was turned into blood. And that kind of goes back to the Nile. And the fish in the Nile died, and the Nile stank so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. There was blood throughout the land of Egypt. So regardless of where you lived, even if you weren't right on the Nile, blood's everywhere. But here's the weird thing. The Egyptians did the same with their spells. And Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as the Lord had spoken. Pharaoh turned and went into his palace, paying no regard even to this. And all the Egyptians had to dig around the Nile for drinking water, because they could not drink the water of the Nile. So what did they dig around? Because it says, the water was all bad. So the Nile died. Their God died. And to some extent, Pharaoh, who might have been up until this time trying to pretend that he's a god, he can't go into the Nile anymore. So he may be going to the bathroom for the first time in front of all his people. That's the upshot of that too. And so there's a Shiva period. 7 days had passed after the Lord struck the Nile. And what's weird, of course, is that Pharaoh's magicians could do the same trick. So that trick doesn't seem like such a great trick to Pharaoh, because his courtiers could do the same thing, which, of course, why would they want to do the same thing? They're making the situation to some extent even worse if they do it, but that's kind of the irony of it. And by the way, it's going to continue. When the 7 days had passed after the Lord struck the Nile, the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will then plague your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs, and they shall come up and enter your palace, your bedchamber, and your bed. the houses of your courtiers and all your people, and your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up upon you and all your people and on your courtiers. And there it clearly says frogs. And the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your arm with the rod over the rivers and the canals and the ponds, and bring up the frogs on the land of Egypt. And Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same with their spells and brought frogs up upon the land of Egypt. Whoa, that's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
So it says that the magicians could do the same thing. Now, again, you might want to wonder what, like, aren't they just making this plague even worse because they're bringing up more frogs, more plagues? Look, there are a few things with this plague of frogs. Again, most people think, oh, it's funny. It's frogs. You know, frogs they're kind of a funny animal, and it's not funny because what it says here, by the way, there's even a weird image here. It says right here, frogs, the word Sfardeim, Sfardea is a frog, right? Sfardeim is frogs. But it says right here, he held out his arm over the water and the frogs came up. But here's what it says. It says, Vata'al hatzfardea, a frog came up and covered the land of Egypt. So the rabbis were like puzzled by, why does it use the word Sfardea here and Sfardaim, frogs, elsewhere? And so the rabbis posited in the Midrash that maybe what came out first was one giant frog, crazy big frog. And that frog dissipated magically into millions of other frogs. That's pretty weird. Big frog that then like just kind of turns into lots of little frogs. Other people point out that no, the plague of frogs could be called frog, just like we call, you know, somebody has lice. It's not necessarily plural. It's a singular. It can be a singular, lice, right? It's more than one, right? So it's a plague. You don't have to say locusts. You could say locust. So the Hebrew could be a singular. A swarm of something could be a singular noun. So that's a possibility. But there's possibility that it's just like one giant frog and all the other frogs came out of it. But look what happens. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, plead with the Lord to remove the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So at the second plague, Pharaoh has already cried uncle. And Moses said to Pharaoh, you may have this triumph over me. For what time shall I plead? For what time shall I plead in behalf of you and your courtiers and your people that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses to remain only in the Nile? For tomorrow, he replied, and Moses said, as you say, that you may know that there is none like God. So he said to him, so when do you want this plague of frogs to end? And he goes, tomorrow, end it now, right now. Okay, fine, I'll do it. You'll see. And that'll be proof that it's God. Because if this was a normal frog infestation, wouldn't go away tomorrow. The frogs shall retreat from you and your courtiers and all your people. They shall remain only in the Nile. And then Moses and Pharaoh left Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's presence, and Moses cried out to the Lord in the matter of the frogs which he had inflicted upon Pharaoh. And Moses did as the Lord did as Moses asked. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields. And they piled them up in heaps till the land stank. So, well, you know what happens next. But I will point out that the plague of frogs was pretty disgusting, because one of the things that kind of slipped in there was that the plague of frogs, it says right here, and we did talk about this yesterday in Midrash class. It says right here, plead with the Lord to remove the frogs from me and my people. Now, we normally understand that poetically, which means get these frogs out of here, out of us, out of this area, out of our land. But the Midrash says, nuh-uh. Nuh-uh. The frogs were inside of the people. The frogs were jumping out of their bellies. Frogs were everywhere, including inside of them. Pretty disgusting. So it was a bad plague, really bad plague. But it was a plague, as we read, that the Pharaoh's own courtiers could kind of do, but not like this. When Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he became stubborn and would not heed them, as the Lord had spoken. Thus the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, okay, so again, changes his mind. Doesn't say his heart is stiffened. It says he became stubborn. Kibed et libo. Well, it does actually say kibed et libo. It's a different word. The heart is mentioned there. They just didn't translate it. But it's not chazak or it's not kashe. It is kibed. So it's the third verb here, but it does say heart. But it means, it essentially means a similar thing, which is I'm not going to let him back out. And the Lord said to Moses, now, say to Aaron, hold out your rod and strike the dust of the earth, and it shall turn to lice throughout the land of Egypt. And they did so. Aaron held out his arm with the rod and struck the dust of the earth. And the vermin came upon the land, upon man and beast. All the dust of the earth turned to lice throughout the land of Egypt. So the dust becomes lice. Because again, the lice eggs are not much bigger than a speck of dust. And so all the dust becomes like lice eggs. It's really, really scary. But look what happened. The magicians did the like with their spells to produce lice. They tried.
But they could not.
Could not do it. So they did something, but they couldn't do what Moses and Aaron were doing. The vermin remained upon the man and beast. So what is going on here? This is obviously a plague that affects people. It also, as we can see, affects the animals. That's what it says. Now, again, it doesn't say anywhere here, by the way, that the Israelites are not affected by these plagues as well. Let's pay attention to that. The magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart had stiffened and he would not heed them as the Lord had spoken. And there is again the word chazak libo, the chazak lev Pharaoh, or again, the Pharaoh's heart was stiffened. So those common phrases for his heart, stiffening or hardening. But most importantly, the magicians at this point, at plague number 3, say, we're done. We can't do this. This is God. This is not, we can't, through our science, if you will, we can't do this. We can't fix it. We can't replicate it. We are no match for God. But it doesn't matter. So by the 3rd plague, they've given up. They've given up, which again, they started to give up the 2nd plague by realizing, again, we got to do something. We got to pray at least to help. Maybe God will help us. The Lord said to Moses, early in the morning, present yourself to Pharaoh as he is coming out of the water, back to the water, and say to him, thus says the Lord, let my people go that they may worship me. For if you do not let my people go, I will let loose swarms of insects against you and your courtiers and your people and your houses and the houses of the Egyptians, and the very ground they stand on will be filled with swarms of insects. Now I will tell you that this is only one translation of the word arov. The other translation is wild beasts. And so the version that we're reading here has the plague being the plague of insects, that arov are insects. Does it make sense? Yes. It's also not usually read that way. which is why when we read in the Haggadah, most of the Haggadahs change this fourth plague to wild beasts. Swarms. We don't know what they were exactly swarms of. The Midrash, the traditional answer is that it is swarms of wild animals. Swarms of wild animals. But again, it's not the only translation or the only version of that, because it literally says arov, which means many things, a swarm. So this plague, we hear something different. The fourth plague, it says, but on that day I will set apart the region of Goshen where my people dwell, that no swarms shall be there, that you may know that I, the Lord, am in the midst of the land. And I will make a distinction between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall come to pass. So now we finally get to the fourth plague, where the Israelites are now set apart. So again, we've talked about this in years past, but we always should mention it. That as much as the plagues were there for the Egyptians and for punishment, measure for measure, they also were there to some extent for the Israelites, so that they could understand and believe that they needed to feel the plagues so that they could be afraid, be impressed,
See the power of God.
and see the power of God. And again, as Joyce is pointing out, why is that so important? Because they've been living as slaves for the last few generations, and the natural understanding that they would have had by this point is there's no God. God.
Mm-hmm.
And so God needs to essentially, to some extent, prove himself, God's self, to the people. And so this is where the people need to learn too. And we're not going to, I want to share this now because in case I forget it next week. We read it yesterday, so I might forget. I'm getting old too, you know. I'm getting old. I might forget. We just read yesterday that the plague of darkness, the ninth plague, was a plague that, again, doesn't seem that bad because it's just darkness. People don't seem to be dying. It doesn't kill you, if you will. We didn't talk too much about it. We'll talk more about plague of darkness next week. We didn't talk about it that much in class, but we did read a wonderful, weird, harrowing, nightmarish midrash, which is the plague of darkness, which the Torah says, like this one, won't affect my people. Especially, like, look, fourth through 10th plague don't affect the people, which, by the way, 10th plague doesn't affect the people if you put the blood on the door and follow the rules. If you were an Israelite who didn't put the blood on the door, you make the point that if you didn't get it by now and you were still not believing in God, that you died or somebody in your family died. The firstborn in that house died. But anyways, we read this very interesting midrash, which kind of answers that question of whether the people believed or not, that even after 8 plagues, there still were a lot of people that didn't believe, because the 9th plague did something very weird, which is that it didn't just create darkness, it killed Israelites who didn't believe yet. Bad people. And what the darkness did, because the darkness lasts for a few days, that the darkness allowed the Israelites to bury those people, to gather them up, and the darkness allowed them to bury them in the cover of darkness so that the Egyptians wouldn't know how many bad Israelites there were. And according to the Midrash, it isn't a little, it's a lot. That there was a massive operation to get rid of all these dead Israelites who died on that second to last plague. So this little plague that you think wasn't so bad, according to the Midrash, is really bad. And interestingly, it affects the very people that the Torah kind of says it didn't affect. That the plague actually was to take out the bad Israelites, and so that the Egyptians wouldn't know how many bad Israelites there were. It had to be done in dark. Anyways, but this is a recurring theme now, not affecting Goshen. So the Lord did so. Heavy swarms of insects or heavy swarms invaded Pharaoh's palace and the houses of his courtiers. Throughout the country, the land was ruined because of the swarms. I'm not going to say insects because I don't know that it's insects. And it doesn't say insects. It literally just says arov, the wild, the swarms. And the Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, go and sacrifice to your God within the land. You can do your prayers, just do them here. You can do it just here. So what does Moses say? Moses replied, it would not be right to do this, for what we sacrifice to the Lord is untouchable to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice that which is untouchable to the Egyptians before their eyes, they will stone us. So we must go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he may command us. So assumedly, like maybe we sacrifice sheep, which you guys worship. You would never kill a sheep, and we kill them, and it's going to make you guys hate us if we do it. Now, again, what kind of game is this? Because we already know the objective is to get them out of the land. It's not to get them 3 days away and pray and then come back. So what is this theater? What is this game? And again, it doesn't really matter, because here's what Pharaoh says. Pharaoh said, I'll let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, but do not go very far. Plead then for me. And Moses said, when I leave your presence, I will plead with the Lord that the swarms depart tomorrow from Pharaoh and his courtiers and his people. But let not the Pharaoh again act deceitfully, not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. Don't do this again. So Moses left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Lord. And the Lord did as Moses asked. He removed the swarms from Pharaoh and from his courtiers and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh became stubborn. And there's the kibed. There's the stubborn, the stubborning of his heart, and would not let the people go. So again, it's, we know what's happening. So as we get to chapter 9, so we've gotten through these first 4 plagues. Now we get to the 5th plague, and again we're reading the first 7 plagues. The Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of Hebrews, let my people go to worship me. You know the way this theater goes. If you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them, then the hand of the Lord will strike your livestock in the fields, the horses, the asses, the camels, the cattle, and the sheep, with a very severe pestilence. The word we have is dever, disease. My friends, it's the same word we'd use for today. The word pestilence, dever, is the word that we use for plague. Now we know that, of course, this is a cattle disease. And again, we don't know for sure. As we mentioned yesterday, that it's translated, the Old English or the older translation that we see sometimes is the word murrain, which isn't descriptive of a certain disease. It kind of is a catch-all for lots of diseases. It means death. But this is like hoof and mouth disease. It's some type of cattle, livestock disease. But of course, this is a horrible disease because for people who depend on livestock, which in those days was pretty much everybody, it was your transportation, it was your food, it was the way you worked and plowed in farms. This is everything. This is everything. This is your cars, your food. It's almost every means of production that they had in the ancient world. I'm taking it away. So again, the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of the Egyptians, so that nothing shall die of all that belongs to the Israelites. So that's really crazy that they don't get hit with this disease. Their livestock don't get hit. The Lord has fixed the time tomorrow, and the Lord will do this thing in the land. The Lord did so on the next day. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but of the livestock of the Israelites, not a beast died. When Pharaoh inquired, he found not a head of the livestock of Israel had died. Yet Pharaoh remained stubborn. And again, same word, kibed lev, and he would not let the people go. So that plague is a weird one because, well, first of all, if you notice in this plague, there's no Aaron. Aaron's not in this plague.
Mhm.
And there's never even a hey, what about letting my people go? Okay, I'll let them go, but just don't go. No, there's not even anything with Dever. This disease is horrible, but Pharaoh doesn't even say, and Pharaoh, by the way, knows now that, he sees it. There's not a question, but there's no negotiation. Just says no. So then the next plague, it says, Lord said to Moses and Aaron, each of you take handfuls of soot from the kiln and let Moses throw it toward the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become a fine dust over the land of Egypt and cause an inflammation, breaking out in boils on man and beast throughout the land of Egypt. So they took the soot of the kiln and appeared before Pharaoh. And Moses threw it towards the sky. And it caused an inflammation, breaking out in boils on man and beast. This is shechin, boils. The magicians were unable to confront Moses because of the inflammation. For the inflammation afflicted the magicians as well as the other Egyptians. And so what's pointed out here was that the magicians were not just not able to do a duel with them, which they haven't been doing over the last few plagues anyways. But what's so amazing here is that they can't even use their magic and powers to help themselves. They are completely rendered they're literally laid up themselves. They're completely inoperable. Can't come and help Pharaoh, can't stand next to him because they have the same disease. And of course it says, now back to the stiffened heart. But the Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh and he would not heed them, just as the Lord had said to Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, okay, so we've now read the sixth plague. Goes back to Moses. Early in the morning, present yourself to Pharaoh and say to him, thus said the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go to worship me. For this time I will send all my plagues upon your person and your courtiers and all your people. And in order that you may know that there's none like me in all the world, I could have stretched forth my hand and stricken you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been effaced from the earth. So God says to Pharaoh here, I could have killed all of you with one pestilence. You'd all be dead. And the word that's used here is dever again. So dever clearly is not just cattle pestilence. It's death. It's disease.
Mhm.
And he says, I could have killed all of you. All of you. You and your people all could have been dead. I could have done that. No one would have I wouldn't have even broken a sweat doing that. And you know that because of what I've just done to you. What I did to you was harder than wiping you out. I chose and picked people and didn't have those people get hurt by the plague. And not only that, I cured it the next day. There's no question that this is me doing this. I have spared you for this purpose, in order to show you my power, and in order that my fame will resound throughout the world. That you continue to thwart my people and do not let them go. So, what's going on here? Again, I call it theater, political theater, that Pharaoh is caught in this cycle of behaving in a way that he can't seem to get out of. And it seems as though he knows better. He knows. Rationally, he knows what's happening. But he doesn't allow himself to listen to the information. He doesn't allow himself to process the information. He doesn't allow himself to let himself off the hook. He knows what he needs to do, but yet he won't do it. Now the Torah says, well, he can't. It's God has stiffened his heart. And I will point out that the heart and mind in the Torah are used synonymously or in conjunction with each other, however you want to understand it. But the word lev doesn't literally mean like the emotions. It means your heart, mind, the unification of those things. Your ability to understand and comprehend is also your lev, not just your emotions, but your actual rational understanding. So he knows how to get out of this. He knows what he's seen is he knows they're miracles. People have told him. He knows it. He's seen it with his own eyes. He's gone out and seen it. He's talked to his courtiers. The Torah said all of this has happened. And yet he cannot stop himself from doing this. He cannot stop himself from continuing down this road. There's nothing he can do. And again, you could say, as I mentioned, he can't because he needs to be punished. He can't get out of it because him and the rest of the Egyptians have to be punished. They can't escape punishment. But there is something really strange about this, which is how does somebody know all this and yet not recognize it? How do they behave in such a way that everything tells them, including their own minds, and everyone tells them they're doing the wrong thing, yet they can't stop themselves from doing the wrong thing? We've seen it so many times. We've maybe done it where we know we're doing something wrong, yet we can't stop ourselves. And when we talk about people engaging in self-destructive behavior, there's no way of rationally explaining it because they know it. They understand it rationally. So you can't say, well, it's rational behavior. It's self-destructive behavior. And one could describe it as it's an act of God because there is no way for us to stop it. We can't even stop it. And to some extent, there's this feeling like it's out of our hands. Not that we blame God or maybe we do, but we could also say there's no way this person could stop themselves from doing this. And we see it so many times. I mean, obviously addiction is probably the most obvious example. You know, those are the most common and kind of the most frequently ones we encounter where people are on a self-destructive, addiction to substances or, alcohol or whatever, food or whatever it is. And you say, well, they know that this is going to destroy them, but they can't stop. And you can't, these are smart people sometimes who can't stop themselves. So there are examples of this, folks, in our world that are frustrating.
Many.
Really frustrating. And so, I like to remind people that as difficult as this portion is to wrap your head around, not because of the miracles necessarily, but because of this, why is he so stubborn? Why does he not listen? Because, each one of us has the possibility of being a Pharaoh. Mm-hmm. And we are oftentimes our own worst enemies. So this is the the inner Pharaoh, and the rabbis pointed that out centuries ago. They continue to do that today. We talk about it at Passover. I have a whole Haggadah that's written by Orthodox rabbis for people who are suffering with addiction. There's other Haggadahs too for people who are suffering with addictions that are not written by Orthodox, but the Orthodox recognize that there's parts of this story that speak to us on Passover, especially where we read this portion, and we read in the previous week's portion, and we read about Pharaoh whose heart was hardened. And of course, when we do the plagues, take out a little bit of our cup. The irony, of course, is that, we're remembering the Egyptians, we're remembering Pharaoh, but are we listening ourselves to, and again, the obvious thing is to talk about the modern plagues that we deal with today, but are we also not really thinking about our own behaviors and being our own Pharaoh, that we are subservient to our own inner Pharaoh? So again, it's easy to talk about politics. It's easy to talk about the parallels to the world around us, especially when we're dealing with plague. But God willing, we'll be vaccinated, and this time next year, this will be history. But we'll still be living with the inner Pharaoh. And hopefully that Pharaoh won't have a lot of power. So again, back to the original Pharaoh. God says through Moses, "This time tomorrow I will rain down very heavy hail, such as not been seen. It has not been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Therefore, bring all your livestock and everything you have in the open, bring it under shelter. Every man and beast that's outside, not having been brought indoors, shall perish when this hail comes down upon them." Those among Pharaoh's courtiers who feared the Lord's word brought their slaves and livestock indoors to safety. But to those who paid no regard to the word of the Lord, they left their slaves and livestock in the open. The Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm toward the sky, that hail may fall on the land of Egypt, upon man and beast and all the grasses of the fields in the land of Egypt." So Moses held out his rod toward the sky, and the Lord sent thunder and hail and fire streamed down to the ground as the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. And again, that's, a destructive hailstorm. Hail was very heavy, fire flashing in the midst of hail. So again, there are people who say this sounds a lot like a meteor, like a asteroid, crashing into the earth, or some type of fire hail. This isn't just normal hail that's snow. But again, we also know that hail can be very destructive. Just the hail that can come down in fairly large pieces, because it's coming from the sky, it can do a lot of damage. And again, what happens? Throughout the land of Egypt, the hail struck down all that were in the open, both man and beast. The hail struck down all the grasses of the field and shattered all the trees of the field. It was a disaster. And once again, only in the region of Goshen, where the Israelites were, there was no hail. Thereupon Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron and said to them, "I stand guilty this time. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong." And so this is where the plagues now are followed by Pharaoh saying, "Yeah, I did the wrong thing. Yeah, and we deserve to be punished." Now, they say, my people are in the wrong. Now, of course, he doesn't say anything about what that means as far as that we're wrong. What are they wrong for? Were you wrong for the last several hundred years where you enslaved our people and murdered them? And were you wrong for that? Or are you wrong because you keep going back on your word to let us go? Plead with the Lord that there may be an end of God's thunder and hail. I will let you go. You need stay no longer. Well, there he just says, go. You can go. not 3 days, not whatever. Go. Go. Moses said to him, as I go out of the city, I shall spread out my hands to the Lord. The thunder will cease and the hail will fall no more, so that you may know that the earth is the Lord. So you're going to know, not just because of the hail, but once again, when I end this plague, you'll know that it's a miracle. But I know that you and your courtiers do not fear the Lord. You do not fear God. So even as you say this, I know you do not fear God. Now the flax and barley were ruined, for the barley was in the ear and the flax was in the bud, which are main crops of Egypt. But the wheat and emmer were not hurt, for they ripened late. So there still was some hope for them, because maybe they can eat the wheat. That survived the hail. Leaving Pharaoh, Moses went outside the city and spread out his hands to the Lord. The thunder and the hail ceased, and no rain came pouring down upon the earth. So not even rain. It went from crazy hail and lightning and stuff to nothing. Nothing more. Nothing came down. But when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder had ceased, he became stubborn and reverted to his guilty ways, as did his courtiers. So Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had foretold Moses. Now, that doesn't seem to end on a very happy note, I will tell you. That's the end of chapter 9. That's verse 35. And that's the end of the portion. Though, you can make the argument that this is just as God had foretold Moses, which it says every time. I think every time, virtually every time, if not every time, that God says, it's okay. This is the way it was always meant to be. And so when we hear the words Kasher Diber Adonai Biyad Moshe, the last words through Moses, and that God said all this, don't give up, because this is exactly what God wanted. And so as bad as it is, and as bad as, again, there's no freedom here, as the first 7 plagues come to an end, and as our Torah portion comes to an end, we're not despondent, because as much as we want to go, there is a certain sense of, you know what, let's see what happens to these people next, because they need to be punished. It's not over. They haven't given up yet, and so they still need to be punished. And so at a certain point where the Israelites sitting back going, yeah, let's see what happens next. I want to see what God has in store for these people. Because you know what? They haven't been punished the way they need to be punished. Because you know what? Remember when they killed all of our kids? They haven't been punished like that yet. And so because, of course, that is the 10th plague, which, by the way, and I'm not ruining this story because we're going to ruin it. We read it next week. And if you don't know what the 10th plague is, we got problems, because you read it every Passover. So you know what it is. It's the death of the firstborn. Remember when the Egyptians were rounding up Jewish babies, Israelite babies, to kill them, they weren't just the firstborn. They were any baby that was born. First, second, third, fourth, born, doesn't matter. So just remember something. God does punish measure for measure. And again, there's 10 plagues, a lot of plagues. I'm not discounting that there's a lot of plagues and a lot of punishment. But as much as there's justice, God does not give the Egyptians everything that had happened to the Israelites, because the Israelites lost all of their kids when they were being murdered by the Egyptians. And we don't know how long that lasted for. The Egyptians only lose their firstborn. And so they are punished. It's a horrible punishment. I'm not minimizing it. It says the Pharaoh's own firstborn died. I'm not saying that's not a horrible thing. Pharaoh had 3 kids and only one of them died. It's still very sad. But I want to point out that based on what the Torah says the Egyptians did to us, that every baby that was born, every male baby that was born was killed for years. Not firstborn. Again, every male baby. So that's a lot more. It's a lot more. Again, it doesn't say firstborn are children, by the way. The firstborn that were punished on that 10th plague were assumedly firstborn that were 30, 50, 10.
Every family.
Every family was affected by it.
Regardless of age.
Yeah. So I will tell you that's what the Torah says happened. And it could be, by the way, that it was firstborn daughters too. It doesn't say only men. It says first.
Whoa.
So
Ouch.
I will tell you that, again, there is a measure for measure we feel in this. And when our enemies are getting punished, especially when there's a biblical sense to their being punished, you know, if they haven't relented and if they haven't given up, why would we not expect them to be punished? So look, I'm not arguing that this is a difficult thing to read. We by tradition, again, we take out a little bit of our cut when we read the 10 plagues. We don't rejoice at their suffering. But I thought about this morning as I was reading this portion and being in the midst of everything else that we're dealing with, that again, it seems as though the cumulative effect of everything that we're dealing with is very hard. And so that when we're dealing with upheaval and difficult news that we're reading about, and we're in the midst of a pandemic, that the cumulative effect is very hard. And if you pull out one thing, it's still hard, but the weight of it, it's like a car crash when both of the cars are driving towards each other. The exponential impact of that collision. And I think that's what happens when you're in the midst of a difficult period, and then another thing happens and another thing happens, and it really does start to beat people down. And I will tell you that, again, what I've felt in this last couple of weeks is, we've been dealing with the coronavirus in our world since March, and we've been dealing with the effects of it. But now in our community, and again, for what I'm seeing in our own community, losing people now that I know, and that people are being very adversely affected by this, it's crushing for me. And I just got an email while we were in class just now that somebody else passed away. So it's been a reality. I've been dealing with it, but now I didn't honestly, until the summer, I didn't even know anybody very well who had died of COVID. And now there's almost a day that's going by now that I don't get a call every day from somebody that I knew who's now not alive because they contracted this or it added to their existing health issues. So it is really hard because, again, I know it's out there. It's not like I know that the disease isn't there, but I'm actually now getting hit with the losses of people that I know and care about. So I will tell you that we hope that again, people will come out of this soon. And I also thought about it this morning, not that, again, I was celebrating, because we don't celebrate, but reading about this attack on these bases in Syria today, that Israel pulled off an attack on some of the Iranian bases there. And I got to tell you, as much as I, again, I'm not cheering for the destruction of people, the death and destruction of people's lives, it is good to know that that justice is being done on people who are completely bent on destroying Israel. So I don't know if people heard about this today, but that happened this morning, or I guess earlier today in Iran. So I did. Am I? It sounds like people didn't hear about this. Am I?
I didn't.
I didn't.
Okay, so let me
No,
share this while we're
Where
finishing.
did you get your information in the morning?
This is from Reuters. Again, I know there's a lot of other things going on out there. So this is according, I mean, I heard the report. This is a different report than what I saw, but I just searched. The guy got this one quick. But this is, I read that a different group that monitors what's going on in the Syrian Observation Force group. I read their report, but this is the Syrian news agency said that Israel struck Deir el-Zor, which is, again, Revolutionary Guards. So it says right here, Israel's hit more than 500 targets since 2020. So that happened today.
Right.
So definitely was thinking about it today. I mean, Syria is obviously a country that doesn't need to have more bombs fall on it, but if they're going to allow Iran to have bases there, that's what's going to happen. So yeah. So
I heard from a friend that there was problems in the Persian Gulf too, that there were ships and that there was conflict. Did you hear that?
Yeah, well, it's constant. The difference is now is that
Elevated.
there's a feeling that maybe some of this is going to be done while Trump is still in office, because such actions are not going to be as easy for Israel to undertake in a couple weeks. So Israel has to do this soon, and knows has a government right now that it will allow them to do this. Understand again, the Iran Revolutionary Guard is the front. That's the front line forces of people that are spreading Iranian power over the Middle East. So they're the ones who are helping out Hezbollah. They're the ones who are helping out Assad in Syria. This is a Reuters story, folks. This is not like Israel government stuff. This is Reuters. Iran's proxy militias held by Lebanon's Hezbollah now hold sway over vast areas in eastern, southern, and northwestern Syria, as well as suburbs around Damascus. And they also control the Lebanese-Syrian border area. So this is serious stuff, folks. And it's not something that gets a lot of coverage in America, but it is of concern. And I mentioned yesterday, I binged through a really good series that's on, I think it's a really good series. It's on Apple TV. It's called Tehran, and it's about Mossad operations inside Iran, and it follows a Israeli woman of Iranian background who is a Mossad agent who's infiltrated and is spying and helping the Mossad inside Tehran. So it's on Apple TV. It's 8 episodes. I watched it really fast because I think it's really good. I know there's a lot of things to maintain, and I will tell you though, if you buy an Apple product, or if you bought an Apple product in the last year, you get Apple TV for a year free. So I don't know if it holds for phones, it might, but definitely if you have a chance, watch Tehran. And it reminds you that Israel, and when the show came out last year, it was before Israel had pulled off this amazing attack on Iran's top nuclear scientist, where people were like, how did they do this? And this show is about those kinds of things that are going on. And it also kind of shows you what's going on in Iran right now with the hope that that government will come to an end, because it is a terrible country for its citizens. It's a terrible country for the Middle East, not just Israel. And there's a reason why Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and UAE and every other country in the Middle East that's not a Shia country is rushing to the embrace of Israel, because they know that Iran's ambitions are not good, and that as bad as those governments are, the wave that comes over from Iran is not going to be a good one for them. And I don't know. I don't know what to say other than we live in strange times, folks, and hopefully they'll be more peaceful in this next year. But again, there is still evil out there, and it is this show, Tehran, kind of shows you, and again, it's fictionalized and it's dramatized, but it shows, you know, these public executions that go on in Iran, and the fear that young people have in that country of their government. It is a good reminder that we do have an enemy out there. So this is not theoretical, and it's not something we should ignore. So again, everybody, please stay safe and don't take for granted your health and the health of your friends and family. And again, please, I just hope everybody is healthy and starts to feel like we can start emerging soon. My hope. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Again, I really appreciate having something good to look forward to today, and studying with and being with everybody here today. It was definitely one of those good things I was looking forward to. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye. Bye.
Stay good.
Thank
Stay
you.
good, everybody. Stay good.
Stay safe and healthy.